Danny Torrance in The Shining functions less as a conventional child character and more as the emotional, psychological, and metaphysical center of the film. While much of the surface narrative appears to focus on his father's unraveling, Danny is the true lens through which the hotel's horror is perceived. From the opening moments, Danny is marked as different, withdrawn, introspective, and already burdened by knowledge he does not fully understand. His quiet demeanor is not simply shyness or trauma. It is the result of a consciousness stretched beyond ordinary childhood experience. He senses things before they happen, absorbs emotional residue from people and places, and exists in constant tension between innocence and awareness. This makes him uniquely vulnerable but also uniquely powerful, and the film consistently frames him as someone navigating forces far larger and older than himself. Danny's psychic ability, referred to as the Shining, is not portrayed as a gift in any comforting sense. Instead, it is an affliction that isolates him and exposes him to visions he cannot contextualize or escape. The way the film presents these visions, fragmented, sudden, and often wordless, mirrors Danny's internal experience. He does not receive neat prophecies. He receives flashes of violence, echoes of past atrocities, and symbols that resist interpretation. This creates a profound psychological burden for a child, one that forces Danny into premature emotional maturity. He understands danger without understanding its rules, which is arguably more terrifying than ignorance. His ability strips him of the protective barrier most children have, the assumption that adults can keep them safe. Tony, Danny's imaginary companion, functions as a psychological coping mechanism and an externalization of his fractured awareness. Tony speaks in a distorted voice and exists as both a warning system and a shield, allowing Danny to process unbearable knowledge at a slight remove. Rather than simply being a childish fantasy, Tony represents the part of Danny that already knows what is coming and is trying, imperfectly, to prepare him. This internal split reflects the film's broader obsession with duality, past and present, sanity and madness, safety and threat. Danny is divided between the child who wants normalcy and the seer who cannot unsee what the hotel shows him. Tony's presence underscores the idea that Danny's mind has adapted defensively to trauma and foresight, creating internal compartments to survive. The Overlook Hotel responds to Danny differently than it does to the adults around him. Where his father is seduced and corrupted, Danny is hunted and exploited. The hotel recognizes Danny as a source of immense psychic energy, something to be consumed or absorbed rather than manipulated. This distinction is crucial because it reframes the horror away from simple possession and toward predation. Danny is not tempted by the hotel's illusions, he is threatened by them. The ghosts appear to him not as seductive fantasies, but as blunt reminders of violence and death, especially the repeated imagery of murdered children. This suggests that the hotel's true nature is not one of temptation but of cyclical abuse, and Danny, as a child, is the most direct victim of that cycle. Danny's relationship with his father adds another layer of tragedy and tension. Even before the hotel's influence becomes overt, Danny lives with the quiet fear of an unstable parent. The film implies a history of violence that has already fractured the family unit, and Danny's Shining seems to amplify his awareness of that danger. He senses his father's anger and resentment long before it fully erupts, making him both a witness and a target. This dynamic turns the haunted hotel into an extension of domestic horror, where the threat is not just supernatural but deeply personal. Danny's fear of his father is never melodramatic. It is subdued, watchful, and heartbreakingly realistic, rooted in the understanding that love does not guarantee safety. Despite his vulnerability, Danny is not a passive victim. His intelligence and adaptability become increasingly clear as the film progresses. When the situation reaches its most dangerous point, Danny uses both his psychic sensitivity and his practical understanding of the environment to survive. His decision-making reflects a child who has learned to think under extreme pressure, drawing on intuition, observation, and emotional restraint. Importantly, the film does not frame this as triumph or heroism in a conventional sense. Danny survives not because he conquers the horror, but because he understands it well enough to evade it. Survival becomes an act of quiet resistance rather than domination. In the end, Danny Torrance represents the enduring cost of trauma and the possibility of endurance without innocence. He emerges from the ordeal alive, but fundamentally changed, carrying experiences that cannot be erased or fully articulated. The film leaves his future ambiguous, suggesting that The Shining will remain with him as both a burden and a means of perception. Danny's character challenges the idea that childhood is inherently protected or pure. Instead, it presents childhood as something that can be invaded, fractured, and reshaped by forces beyond comprehension. Through Danny, The Shining becomes not just a story about madness or ghosts, but about what it means for a child to see too much, too soon, and to keep going anyway. Danny Torrance's story in Dr. Sleep functions as both a continuation and a reckoning, transforming him from a haunted child into a deeply scarred adult who must finally confront what his survival cost him. As an adult, Danny is defined less by who he is than by what he is running from. The Shining that once made him a target now feels like a curse he has spent decades trying to numb. His alcoholism is not incidental. It mirrors his father's descent and represents Danny's attempt to silence the voices, visions, and memories that never stopped following him after the hotel. The film presents this addiction not as moral failure, but as self-medication, a desperate effort to blunt psychic pain and suppress a power he associates with trauma and death. Unlike the child Danny, who tried to understand his visions, the adult Danny tries to erase them. What makes Danny's arc in Dr. Sleep compelling is the way it reframes survival as an unresolved trauma rather than a victory. He lived, but he never healed. The ghosts he locked away as a child are still present, sealed behind mental doors that require constant effort to keep shut. This suggests that his earlier coping strategies, while effective in the short term, prevented genuine processing of his experiences. Danny grows into a man who is emotionally stagnant, isolated, and quietly ashamed, haunted not only by supernatural remnants but by guilt and fear of becoming his father. His Shining becomes something he actively resents, because it is inseparable from the pain it has caused him and the destruction it has witnessed. Danny's eventual decision to help others marks the first meaningful shift in his relationship with The Shining. When he begins using his abilities to comfort the dying, the power that once traumatized him gains a purpose that is gentle and humane rather than violent. This is a crucial development because it reframes The Shining as something that does not have to exist solely in the context of horror. For the first time, Danny is not reacting to his power but choosing how to use it. This choice does not erase his pain, but it allows him to recontextualize it, turning endurance into empathy. He becomes someone who understands suffering intimately and uses that understanding to ease the fear of others, suggesting that trauma can produce compassion rather than only destruction. The introduction of Abra as a younger, more powerful psychic forces Danny to confront his own past from a new angle. Abra is everything Danny once was: gifted, frightened, and dangerously visible to predatory forces. His relationship with her transforms him into a protector, a role that directly counters the helplessness of his childhood. Where no one could truly shield him, he now has the chance to become the adult he needed. This mentorship is not sentimental. It is strained by his fear of exposing her to the same horrors that shaped him. Yet this fear also drives his growth, because helping Abra requires Danny to stop hiding from the world and from himself. The antagonistic force in Dr. Sleep represents a more explicit articulation of what the hotel symbolized: the exploitation of pain, especially the pain of children, for power and longevity. Danny's confrontation with these predators is deeply personal, as they embody the same dynamic that once targeted him. However, unlike before, Danny is no longer a passive receiver of horror. He understands how these forces operate, both psychologically and supernaturally, and this knowledge gives him agency. His power, once overwhelming and chaotic, becomes something he can wield strategically, even if doing so terrifies him. Returning to the site of his childhood trauma is the culmination of Danny's journey, forcing him to face the ghosts he spent his life avoiding. This return is not about reclaiming innocence, but about acknowledging damage. The memories he confronts are not romanticized. They remain terrifying, painful, and unresolved. Yet Danny's willingness to face them directly signals growth. He no longer tries to suppress or deny his past, but integrates it into his sense of self. This act transforms the place of his greatest fear into a battleground where he can finally assert control, even at great personal cost. Danny Torrance's story in Dr. Sleep ultimately reframes the idea of legacy. He inherits trauma, addiction, and psychic power, but he also inherits the capacity to choose a different ending. His arc suggests that breaking cycles does not mean escaping the past, but engaging with it honestly. Danny does not defeat his trauma by erasing it. He survives by accepting it, using what once wounded him to protect others. In doing so, he becomes something neither the frightened child nor the broken adult could be alone. A figure defined not by what hurt him, but by what he chose to do with that pain.